There's a kind of man who looks strong from the outside. He talks confidently, he dresses well, and he might even claim he's different from other men. But deep down, he's ruled by his emotions. He reacts instead of responds. He seeks validation instead of respect. And he confuses control with love. You'll know you're dealing with an immature man not by how he behaves when things are easy, but by how he treats you when things don't go his way. A Stoic once said, "Anyone can hold the helm when the sea is calm." But life and relationships are not calm seas. They are storms, tests, and waves that reveal who a man truly is. Today, we're going to break down 4 things an immature man will always do to a woman, and how to recognize them before they destroy your peace, your worth, or your emotional balance. And we'll also explore how Stoic philosophy can guide you, not only to protect your heart, but to understand the difference between a man who merely looks mature and one who truly is. Part 1. What emotional immaturity really means. Emotional immaturity isn't about age. It's not about how many relationships a man's had or how long he's been alive. It's about how he handles discomfort, rejection, and responsibility. Seneca once said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." An immature man wastes time, not just his own, but also the time of the woman who believes in him. He wastes it on drama, ego, avoidance, and games. A mature man, on the other hand, builds peace, not chaos. He doesn't run from accountability, he runs toward it. Because he understands that true strength isn't found in dominance or control, but in self-control. When a man is emotionally immature, everything he does in a relationship becomes about himself. His ego becomes the center of the story. He measures love in attention, not in consistency. He interprets silence as rejection, and he takes things personally, even when they aren't. The Stoic lens, the root of immaturity. To the Stoics, emotional immaturity was simply a symptom of an untrained mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." An immature man hasn't learned that yet. He still believes his emotions are facts, and that his impulses define him. When he's angry, he lashes out. When he's jealous, he accuses. When he's afraid, he hides behind pride. He doesn't yet understand that emotional maturity means mastery over reaction. And until a man learns that, no matter how charming, intelligent, or attractive he seems, he will eventually hurt the woman who loves him. Sign number 1. He uses emotion as a weapon. An immature man doesn't argue to find understanding. He argues to win. When he feels insecure, he might start guilt-tripping you. When he feels unseen, he might withdraw affection. When he feels wrong, he'll twist the story until he becomes the victim. This is not communication. It's emotional manipulation. A mature man can sit with discomfort and say, "I felt hurt when you said that." An immature man will say, "You always make me feel like I'm not good enough." See the difference? The first response takes ownership. The second projects blame. Epictetus said, "What upsets people is not things themselves, but their judgments about things." An immature man has not yet learned to question his judgments. He still sees the world, and you, through the filter of his ego. If he feels ignored, he assumes you're losing interest. If you assert boundaries, he calls you cold. But here's the truth. You cannot build peace with someone who interprets your self-respect as rejection. An emotionally immature man needs constant reassurance because he can't yet give it to himself. And a woman who gives endlessly to fill that void will slowly lose her own sense of worth. A Stoic reflection. The trap of reaction. Imagine Marcus Aurelius sitting in his tent during war, hearing that his generals betrayed him. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. He wrote instead, "If it is endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining." That's emotional maturity, the ability to pause, to breathe before reacting, to let reason speak louder than ego. An immature man doesn't pause. He reacts instantly, impulsively, and destructively. Because silence feels like defeat to him. But to a Stoic, silence is wisdom. When a man hasn't learned this, he will keep creating chaos to feel alive. He'll start unnecessary arguments, then blame you for not understanding him. He'll withdraw affection as a punishment. He'll say things like, "You've changed," when in truth, you've simply stopped tolerating his immaturity. Story segment, this cycle of emotional immaturity. There was once a woman who loved a man for his potential. He had big dreams, spoke about discipline, and said he wanted to grow. But every time she brought up something real, a problem, a fear, a need, he'd deflect it with humor or anger. When she cried, he'd roll his eyes. When she asked for time to talk, he'd say, "You always want to talk about feelings." At first, she thought he was just emotionally unavailable. But then she realized he wasn't unavailable. He was afraid. Afraid of vulnerability. Afraid of accountability. Afraid of being seen without the mask. The Stoics would call that emotional slavery. Being ruled by the passions rather than ruling over them. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In relationships, that means the best way to respond to immaturity is not to match it, but to rise above it. Because when you stop reacting to chaos, you stop feeding it.
He doesn't communicate to connect, he communicates to control. He believes that if he can make you feel guilty or confused, he can regain the power he doesn't feel within himself. But this is only the beginning. Immaturity has layers, and it often hides beneath what looks like confidence. Some men appear strong, decisive, and assertive on the surface, but deep down, they're terrified of emotional responsibility. Now, we'll look at the second and third signs of an immature man, the ones that show up slowly, quietly, and can destroy a relationship from within if you don't recognize them in time. Sign number 2, he cannot take accountability. When something goes wrong, an immature man always finds someone or something to blame. He'll say things like, "You made me do it. If you hadn't said that, I wouldn't have reacted that way. It's not my fault, that's just how I am." To him, everything is an external problem. He doesn't yet understand what Epictetus meant when he said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the view which they take of things." An immature man doesn't examine his view, he defends it. He doesn't pause to reflect, He attacks, deflects, or withdraws. Why? Because accountability feels like shame to him, and shame is unbearable for someone who's still ruled by ego. The psychology behind it. In modern psychology, this is called external locus of control, a belief that life happens to you, not because of you. It's the mindset of someone who's emotionally reactive instead of proactive. A mature man sees his mistakes as feedback. An immature man sees them as threats. When confronted, he'll twist reality to protect his fragile self-image. If you point out that he hurt you, he'll say you're too sensitive. If you set a boundary, he'll say you're trying to control him. He doesn't realize that every excuse he makes keeps him trapped in the same emotional immaturity that's ruining his peace. The Stoic parallel, self-mastery. The Stoics believed that a man's strength was measured not by what he conquered outside himself, but what he conquered within. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if you will ever dig." The immature man never digs. He skims the surface of life, chasing pleasure, avoiding pain, never realizing that his avoidance is the reason for his suffering. When he fails, he blames others. When he's rejected, he blames timing. When a woman leaves him, he says, she was ungrateful. But a Stoic man, a man of true maturity, says, what can I learn from this? What part of this was in my control? What must I change within myself to avoid repeating this pain? That's maturity, not perfection, but reflection. Story segment. The man who couldn't be wrong. Let me tell you a story. There was a man named Daniel. He was charming, ambitious, and intelligent. But whenever his girlfriend brought up an issue, whether it was about communication, effort, or attention, Daniel would find a way to make it her fault. If she said, you don't listen, he'd reply, you always nag. If she said, you hurt me when you said that, he'd laugh and say, you're too emotional. For a while, she believed him. She doubted herself, questioned her sensitivity, and tried harder. But one day, she realized he never once said, you're right. He never once said, I'll work on that. Because to him, being wrong meant being weak. And that's the tragedy of emotional immaturity. It turns growth into humiliation and love into defense. Stoicism teaches the opposite, that strength is in humility, that saying I was wrong is not a loss of pride, but a victory of character. How immature men avoid responsibility. Immature men avoid accountability in subtle ways. They deflect. Let's not make a big deal out of this. They minimize. It's not that serious. They project. You're just as bad. They joke, using humor to escape discomfort. But behind every joke, every excuse, every argument is a man who fears his own reflection. Marcus Aurelius once said, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Immaturity argues. Maturity acts. Stoic reflection, the mirror test. Ask yourself, or ask any man, this question. When something goes wrong, do you look in the mirror first? Because that single question reveals everything. Immature men see mirrors as threats. Mature men see them as teachers. A mirror doesn't lie, it reflects. It shows you where you are, not where you wish to be. And every man who avoids mirrors will keep repeating the same lessons through pain until life forces him to look. Sign number 3. He can't regulate his emotions. The third sign of an immature man is his inability to control his emotions. He swings from affection to anger, calm to chaos, love to withdrawal, all within hours. His emotional state becomes unpredictable, and as a result, everyone around him starts walking on eggshells. Seneca warned, He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary. An immature man suffers constantly, not because of what happens to him, but because he magnifies what happens to him. He overthinks, overreacts, and overcompensates. If you take too long to reply, he panics. If you disagree, he feels attacked. If you set a boundary, he'll feel rejected. Because his emotions control him, he feels everything intensely but never clearly. The Stoic ideal, emotional temperance. To the Stoics, emotional control wasn't suppression, it was wisdom. They didn't say, don't feel. They said, don't let feelings rule your reason. Epictetus wrote, if you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it. An immature man hasn't yet learned this discipline. He doesn't pause to evaluate his feelings. He lets them dictate his words, his tone, his decisions. So one day he'll be overly affectionate, saying things like, "You're my world." The next, he'll withdraw completely and say, "I just need space." He confuses emotional intensity for emotional depth. He believes passion equals love, but passion without discipline is chaos. Story segment. The emotional roller coaster. A woman once told me this. I never knew which version of him I was going to get. Some days he'd call me 10 times a day. Other days he'd ignore me for hours. I felt like I was constantly chasing his mood. That's what being with an immature man feels like. A never-ending emotional guessing game. One day you're the love of his life, and the next he's distant and cold. The Stoics would say he's enslaved to his passions, because to them, freedom wasn't about doing whatever you feel, it was about being unaffected by your impulses. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." An immature man is the opposite, strict with others and lenient with himself. He demands understanding but gives none. He expects loyalty but offers instability. He wants peace but creates drama. Modern psychology connection. In psychological terms, this is called emotional dysregulation. It often stems from childhood, when boys are taught to suppress emotions instead of process them. They grow up equating vulnerability with weakness. So when they finally feel something deeply, they don't know how to handle it. Instead of naming the emotion, anger, fear, sadness, they express it through control, withdrawal, or outbursts. The Stoics taught the antidote centuries ago, awareness. To be aware of one's mind is to be free from it. An emotionally mature man feels anger, but chooses patience. He feels fear, but chooses courage. He feels pain, but chooses understanding. That's the Stoic path, not the absence of emotion, but the mastery of it. Practical Stoic lesson. The pause. There's a powerful Stoic exercise called the pause. Before responding to anything that provokes you, a text, an insult, an argument, pause. Take 3 deep breaths and ask, is this within my control? If I react now, will it serve my peace? Most of the time, the answer is no. But the immature man doesn't pause. He reacts instantly, trying to win instead of understand. And every time he does, he loses something. Your trust, your respect, your emotional safety. Reflection. So far, we've seen 2 critical patterns. He uses emotion as a weapon. He avoids accountability.